Hi everyone, I'm Grace Simon, and today I want to tell you a story from my past that still troubles me deeply. Every time I recall it, my heart feels heavy, and I can't help but hold myself responsible. It's an experience I wish I could erase. But as we all know, life doesn't always go as planned. This story starts many years ago when I was 18, living with my family in the stunning city of London, a place filled with beauty but also its own shadows. Back then, I believed I had it all. A loving family, with both my parents thriving in their careers. My father, Thomas, is a busy entrepreneur, and my mother, Clara, is a talented interior designer. Despite their demanding jobs, they always made time for me and my two older brothers, Max and James, who are 2 years older than me. If I had to describe them, I'd say they're both incredibly good-looking and charismatic. I've always felt lucky to have brothers like them. Being the youngest, I was doted on by my parents, who ensured I never lacked anything, whether it was material possessions or affection. However, I always felt that their love, as strong as it was, couldn't quite match the bond I shared with Max and James. They weren't just my brothers, they were my guardians and closest friends, always looking out for me. What made their love feel different was how they expressed it through actions rather than words. While my parents focused on providing a comfortable life, Max and James went beyond that. They understood me in ways my parents sometimes couldn't. Whenever I felt low, they could sense it even if I stayed silent. They were my go-to confidants, always ready to listen without judgment. When I was younger and faced bullying at school, it was always Max and James who stood up for me. I remember one instance when classmates mocked me for my outfit, and I came home crying. Both brothers not only consoled me, but also went to the school to address the issue. They didn't resort to violence, but their firm words and stern expressions ensured those bullies never bothered me again. To me, they were heroes, always by my side when I needed them. I recall evenings when the family gathered, but I always chose to sit between Max and James. They'd hug me tightly, often playfully arguing over who got to sit next to me. They'd joke that I was their little princess and that protecting me was their lifelong duty. Over time, I began to feel that their love was unique, unlike anything else in the family. They also helped me navigate the awkward phase of adolescence when I started doubting my appearance. James taught me how to use makeup, assuring me I was beautiful as I was. Max helped me choose outfits, calling me the most adorable little sister. They made me feel cherished and valued unconditionally. To me, my brothers weren't just family. They were my emotional support. When my parents were occupied with work, Max and James ensured I was never alone. They took me to school, helped with homework, and kept me company. On nights when I couldn't sleep, I'd knock on their doors and they'd always let me in, telling me funny stories or simply staying with me until I drifted off. Those small acts made me believe their love for me was deeper than what I received from my parents. But that very love, which I thought was pure, became the root of my deepest regret. It's a story that requires more time to explain, and I'm not sure if anyone will fully grasp it. Everything that happened when I was 18 completely altered my life. When I find the strength, I'll share the rest of that memory with you. I remember it all vividly. As the youngest, I often did playful things without worrying about consequences. Sometimes I'd climb onto their laps or sit beside them as if it were the most normal thing. Max and James weren't just my brothers. They were my closest friends. the people I felt most at ease with. One warm summer afternoon, I stepped out of my bedroom. Sunlight poured through the large window, filling the living room with a calm, soothing glow. Max and James were on the sofa, absorbed in a TV show. I didn't know what they were watching, but they seemed completely engrossed. As usual, I walked over, rubbing my eyes absent-mindedly. Without saying a word, I tiptoed closer. Neither of them noticed me at first. Smirking mischievously, I jumped onto the sofa and landed on both their laps. Startled, Max flinched, while James laughed and said, "Little sister, what are you up to now?" I just giggled, said nothing, and settled comfortably, resting my head on Max's shoulder. "What are you two watching so intently?" I asked, but they didn't reply right away. When I glanced at the screen, I realized they were watching a romantic movie. At that moment, the film reached its peak. A passionate embrace followed by a kiss. When Max and James noticed I was watching, they grew uneasy. James awkwardly smiled, covering my eyes, and said, "Don't look, Grace. This isn't for kids." I laughed, squirming out of his hold. "I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 18, I teased, my tone playful, but my curiosity piqued. Despite his efforts to shield my eyes, I tried to peek through his fingers, still laughing as I joked with them. In that moment, I shifted my hand to steady myself on James's thigh. I'm not sure if it was intentional, but my hand brushed against something in his pocket. A firm, warm sensation that made my heart race. I pulled my hand back instantly, panic surging through me. I couldn't bring myself to look at either of them, overwhelmed by shame. "I'm sorry," I stammered, quickly getting up and rushing to my room. I slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it, my heart pounding, as if I'd done something terribly wrong. Sitting on my bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Was I overreacting, or had it been an accident? The memory of that sensation in James's pocket kept replaying in my mind, making my face burn with embarrassment. I wasn't sure what to think, but the guilt was overwhelming. I wondered if Max and James would simply brush it off with a laugh. But I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind. It wasn't because I had touched something inappropriate, but because I realized I had crossed a line without even knowing it. For the first time, I noticed that the boundary between us, which I had always believed was unshakable, was far more delicate than I'd imagined. Later that evening, after staying hidden in my room for a while, I decided to go downstairs. I was hungry, and I knew my family was probably waiting for me. Still, I felt uneasy from what had happened earlier, unsure if Max and James were thinking about it too. I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as big a deal as I thought. Maybe they had already forgotten. Quietly, I opened my door and tiptoed down the hallway, avoiding eye contact as I approached the living room. I stopped to listen. It seemed empty, and I let out a sigh of relief. I assumed they were in the kitchen or somewhere else. When I stepped into the living room, I was surprised to find it completely deserted. How odd, I thought, pausing by the sofa where I had sat earlier. Just as I was trying to figure out what had been on TV, I heard voices behind me. James's voice called out, "What are you doing, Grace?" I jumped in shock, and Max burst out laughing, saying, "You look like a thief." I screamed in surprise, spinning around to see them both standing there. Their sudden appearance made my heart skip, and we all jumped at the same time. James and Max laughed while I stood there, clutching my chest, both startled and amused. "You two scared me half to death," I exclaimed, trying to look angry, but unable to hold back my laughter. What about you? You look like you're up to something sneaky, Max teased, raising his eyebrows. James patted my head playfully. You're not planning to steal food, are you? I laughed along with them, and the awkwardness from earlier seemed to fade. I thought to myself, what I touched couldn't have been what I thought it was. Otherwise, Max and James wouldn't be laughing like this. That thought brought me some comfort, and I tried to act as if nothing had happened. I was just checking to see if anyone was here, I said, trying to change the subject. What are you two doing behind me? Were you trying to scare me? Max shrugged, pretending to be serious. Yeah, I just wanted to give you a little fright, but I didn't expect you to jump so much. James added with a laugh. Who would have thought you'd react like that? Your face was priceless. We all burst into laughter, and the tension finally melted away. At that moment, James placed his hand on my shoulder and said, All right, let's go eat. The whole family's waiting for you. I nodded, smiling, and followed them into the kitchen, where everyone had gathered. My parents greeted me warmly, and I sat down at the table, feeling at ease in the warm, cozy atmosphere. During dinner, the conversation was filled with laughter. My parents talked about their work, and Max and James occasionally teased me with light-hearted jokes. I joined in, and the earlier embarrassment seemed to disappear. After dinner, I helped my mom with the dishes, and then went to my room to get ready for bed. As I lay in bed that night, I thought back to the events of the afternoon. Although I still felt a little embarrassed about what had happened, the anxiety was gone. I smiled to myself, reassured that everything was fine. Max and James were still the best brothers I could ever ask for, and I fell asleep peacefully, convinced it was all behind me. But it wasn't. My room and theirs were separated only by a thin wall, and even the slightest sounds, whether from a movie or music, could easily travel through. One morning I, who was known for sleeping late, woke up at 7 a.m., unusually early. At first, I thought I had woken up from a dream I couldn't remember. Or maybe the sunlight streaming through the curtains had startled me. But as I became more awake, I noticed an odd sound coming from the next room. My room was between Max and James's rooms, and our house, built in a traditional style with thin walls, meant that if someone played music or watched TV loudly, the sounds could easily be heard in the other rooms. I was used to hearing Max and James chatting or playing games, but this morning the sound was different. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to catch my attention. At first, I thought they were watching an action movie or something similar. But after a few minutes, I began to feel something was off. The sounds were irregular, sometimes slow, sometimes quick. My heart started to race, and a thought crossed my mind that made my face burn. I didn't want to believe it. But as the sound became clearer, I was sure it wasn't music or normal conversation. It was a series of rapid, sensual sounds mixed with heavy breathing. I tried to stop myself from thinking about what I was hearing, but the more I listened, the more certain I became. I couldn't ignore the fact that Max and James were likely watching something of an adult nature. A wave of embarrassment washed over me, and I wondered why I was awake to hear this. My heart pounded so fast, I thought it might burst, and my body felt like it was on fire. I covered my face with my hands, trying to push the inappropriate thoughts away. This is private, I told myself. But what made it even stranger was hearing these sounds coming from their room. We had always been so close, and I never imagined I'd be in a situation like this. I didn't want to hear it anymore, but the sound seemed to cling to me, growing louder. I sat up in bed and quietly opened my door. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but the anxiety in my chest made it impossible to stay still. I walked softly down the hall, trying to make as little noise as possible. But as I reached their door, the sound was so clear it felt like the walls no longer separated us. I stood still outside the door, feeling embarrassed and confused. My heart pounded, and my thoughts were a jumbled mess. I knew this was something everyone experiences, but hearing it from Max and James's room was different. I didn't know how to react. I bit my lip, unsure whether to turn back or keep standing there. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to steady my breathing, but the noise seemed to burn away all rational thoughts. Part of me wanted to leave, but the other part was drawn in, unable to pull away. Suddenly, the door opened, and I stepped back in shock. James stood there, wide-eyed, looking as if he'd just been caught doing something he shouldn't. I stood frozen, unsure of what to say. We stared at each other in silence, the quiet between us heavy and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. James cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension. "Grace, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice shaky and filled with embarrassment. He was clearly struggling to stay calm, scratching the back of his head and avoiding my gaze. His face was flushed, and I wasn't any better. My heart was racing, and my entire body felt hot. I looked down, unable to meet his eyes, and mumbled, I was just passing by. My words were weak, but they were all I could manage in that moment. Just then, the noise from inside the room stopped abruptly, and Max stepped out from behind James. His face mirrored James's expression, red and full of awkwardness. He glanced at me briefly before looking away, unable to hold eye contact with either of us. We all stood there, unsure of what to say, the tension between us palpable. I forced a nervous smile, running my hand through my hair to mask my discomfort. I was just passing by, I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. It's nothing. I'm leaving. I turned quickly and hurried back to my room, desperate to escape the awkward situation. I could feel their eyes on me as I left, though I didn't look back. When I reached my room, I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My heart was still pounding, and I felt as though I'd been caught witnessing something I shouldn't have. The embarrassment lingered, and I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind. The way James and Max had looked at me, the awkward silence that followed. It all replayed over and over, no matter how hard I tried to push the thoughts away. The more I tried to forget, the stronger the memories became. I kept telling myself it was just an unexpected situation, something no one had planned, but I couldn't shake the worry that it might have changed things between us forever. A short while later, there was a knock on my door. My heart sank, and I knew it wasn't my parents. They usually just walked in when they needed me. It had to be Max or James. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself before opening the door. James stood there, looking just as embarrassed as before. He avoided my gaze, his hands fidgeting nervously. "Grace, I'm really sorry about what happened earlier," he said softly. "It's not what you think. We were just watching a movie, and maybe the timing wasn't great." I hesitated, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. Then Max appeared behind him, looking just as uncomfortable. His eyes darted between me and James, as if searching for the right words. No one spoke for a few moments. the silence heavy once again. I realized that if this awkwardness continued, it would only make things worse, so I decided to break the silence. I forced an awkward smile, trying to act casual despite the tension. "Come on, I didn't mean it," I said. "Don't look so tense." I was just passing by, really. Max and James exchanged a glance, as if silently communicating. After a brief pause, James let out a sigh, his smile returning slightly. "Really, Grace? You're okay with this? You're not uncomfortable?" I quickly nodded, trying to reassure them both. "Yeah, I'm fine. Honestly, I think we're all just a little awkward about it." To make things easier, I suggested, "How about the three of us sit down and talk? Maybe it'll help us clear the air." Both Max and James seemed surprised by my offer, but after a moment of hesitation, they agreed. We went into my room and I sat down on the bed. To ease the tension, I decided to make a joke. I looked at Max and teased, "So, the movie was so good you both lost track of time?" Max laughed awkwardly, covering his face with his hands. "Come on, Grace. Stop teasing me. It's just that we didn't expect you to hear." I raised my eyebrows playfully. "I thought you guys turned it up so I could hear." We both laughed, and the awkwardness began to fade. After a while, my curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at Max and James, wondering if I should voice what was on my mind. After a moment of hesitation, I gathered the courage to speak. "How about we try something like in the movie?" The words came out before I could stop myself. I wasn't sure how they'd react, but I felt a surge of curiosity I couldn't ignore. Max and James looked at me in surprise. "Are you serious?" James asked, his voice full of confusion. I nodded, trying to keep my expression serious. "I was just curious. It wouldn't hurt to try, right?" I said softly, not daring to look at them directly. "No way," Max replied immediately, shaking his head firmly. They both turned away, clearly uncomfortable, but I wasn't ready to give up. I squeezed both of their hands to reassure them, and myself. "Just try it once. I want to know what it feels like." After a long silence, James sighed and finally spoke. "Okay, but just this once, and we keep it a secret. No one can know." His voice was slow, emphasizing the importance of boundaries. The room fell quiet except for our breathing. My heart raced as we began, each movement careful yet intense. I couldn't tell how much time had passed, but it felt like everything else in the world had faded away, leaving only us. When it was over, sunlight streamed through the room, and a peaceful silence settled over us. We didn't speak, just lay next to each other, breathing evenly. The tension I had feared was gone, replaced by an even deeper connection. We headed to the kitchen together to prepare lunch, and everything felt unexpectedly natural, as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew the boundary between us had shifted. As we sat down to eat, James smiled at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded, returning the smile. "I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more now." I blushed at my words, but they just held my hand, smiling at me with warmth and affection. "You too," they said. From that day on, everything felt different, but in a subtle way. Our relationship, once pure and simple, had crossed an invisible line. The intimacy we shared before had evolved into something more complex. Every time we looked into each other's eyes, there was a new understanding, a deeper connection that hadn't been there before. We didn't talk about it, but we knew the unspoken bond was there, shifting the dynamics between us in ways we couldn't easily explain. But while the change in our relationship was undeniable, Deep down, I knew it wasn't right. What we had done was wrong. We had given in to youthful curiosity. And while it brought us closer in some ways, it also left a mark on my conscience. I couldn't ignore the fact that we had broken some fundamental rules, even if it was unintentional. Our actions had altered the way I saw the world, and it weighed heavily on me. Sometimes I still feel the anxiety creeping in when I think back to that moment. The awkwardness hasn't completely disappeared. Whenever I look at Max or James, I can sense the change in the air. An unspoken tension that lingers just beneath the surface. We never talked about what happened again, as if it was a silent agreement to forget it and move forward. But the way they treat me now is different. They're more careful, gentler in their actions, as though they're afraid to hurt me, even though I know they love me. As for me, I can't help but feel my heart race every time I meet their eyes. There's a mixture of excitement and anxiety, a feeling I've never had before. The curiosity of youth led us down this path, one filled with emotions we weren't ready to handle. Our connection is stronger, but it's also more complicated, and I know deep down things will never be the same again. Looking back, I realize how impulsive and immature I was. Our actions, guided by curiosity and emotion, crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I don't regret it, but I also can't deny the lingering feeling of guilt and confusion. It haunts me, reminding me that curiosity can sometimes lead us down dangerous paths. We may not have intended for things to happen the way they did, but they did. And now we're left to deal with the consequences. Through this experience, I've learned an important lesson. Curiosity, while natural, is not always worth satisfying, especially when it threatens the integrity of relationships and the boundaries that protect us. Life's boundaries aren't there to restrict us. They exist to protect us from making decisions we may regret. Sometimes holding back and staying grounded is the best choice. So, to anyone reading this, I want to offer a piece of advice. Don't let temporary curiosity lead you into making decisions that could ruin the relationships you hold dear. Before acting on strong emotions, stop and think about the long-term consequences. Emotions, especially strong ones, are often fleeting, but the consequences they bring can last a lifetime. Cherish the relationships you have, and respect the boundaries that come with them. True love, the kind that lasts, doesn't require impulsive actions to prove its strength. It's built on trust, respect, understanding, and responsibility. That's the most important lesson I've learned.